The words of the Reverend Katie Romano Griffin. Come, let us enter this space of hope and community. Come, let us enter this space with our sorrows, our joys, our passion, and our compassion. Come, let us enter this space with the stories of our ancestors, for their strength and wisdom beats in our hearts. Come into this space, present to the beloved companions who move beside us. Come into the space mindful that together we are building a future for future generations. Come into this space and let us worship.
I now invite anyone who would like to come forward for Together Time.
Good morning, good morning. I am Katie Resendez, and I am the Director of Children's Ministry here at UUC Phoenix. I'm so glad to see so many of you today. So, let's see, I'll start here. The first thing is, after service today, you'll notice that most of our high schoolers aren't in service right now because they're in the kitchen. After service today, they will be offering Mexican breakfast food for $6 a plate. How many of you are often hungry after service? How many of you would love an actual full meal with protein after service? So just remember that they're there. That's why they're not with us today. They are missing service so they can serve us food service. The other thing is we're going to talk today about how stories get told and retold and what that means. And sometimes when I tell stories up here, I try to tell them for all of us. But I think we often forget there's an all of us out there too. And specifically the whole world and the whole community. But there's also our UUCP community that's online. And I want to do something that we used to do and have stopped doing, which is to put our hands in a heart and hold it up and say, hi, everyone online, on Zoom and YouTube. We love you so much, and we're so glad you're here. We're so glad you're here. Did we get to see them? Oh, yay. Okay, cool. Oh, yay. I see Liz. I see Lydia, Walt. Oh, my gosh, there's Pat. So many people. Love you all. Okay. Shall I tell a story? I'm going to tell two different stories today. So, a long time ago, like a long, long time ago, more than 60 years ago, there was this group of people in Phoenix who were kind of obnoxious, and they really wanted to push their political agenda. So they got together, and they met once a week in this room, an evening once a week, where they got together, talked about their ideas, and tried to figure out how they were going to push things around and change things. And their goal really was to change Arizona legislature.
Make Arizona great again.
Maybe you could say make Arizona great again. But they didn't get a lot of ground. They had a lot of change in leadership and who was there. They even tried to call themselves a church, which was questionable. They got pushed around a lot, and eventually, actually, they got run out of town, and they couldn't meet downtown anymore, and so they ended up moving to a building way out in the middle of nowhere in the dirt of the desert, miles past the end of the road, and they didn't have a building, so they thought they were going to make a big deal by contracting with a big, famous architect, but he luckily escaped getting saddled with this by the ultimate out and kicking the bucket before the contract went through. So they decided that maybe it was a good idea to have a chauffeur build the building, and they had a driver design the building. And that didn't work out great because now the building still stands, but when it rains real bad, the walls fill up with water, and they seep, so it looks like the building is crying, and excuse me, but I have to tell you, when it happens, it smells like pee. And these people still meet, they're still trying to push their agenda on everyone. They even try to indoctrinate their kids to have the same ideas and beliefs. They try to affect the education system. Stuff around health and reproduction, they push their ideas all over the place. And they're still meeting. There's still this weird little group. There's still a fringe organization. Whatever. Can I tell you a different story? On March 2nd, 1947, I'm looking at Miss Charlotte, is that right? March 2nd, 1947 was the first meeting of the Unitarian Church of Phoenix. They met at the YMCA, a Christian organization, and originally organized themselves as non-denominational, but really they were meeting this one Sabbath evening, Sunday evening a week, to talk about their values and their beliefs, and how their beliefs and values could live in the state legislature, how we could see it live in the laws. And these people worked really hard to create a space for themselves, actually eventually finding the ability to have a home, a physical home, for just $1,000. And they anchored themselves downtown, but then McCarthyism started and so many people were persecuted, including this small group of people who got pushed from one place to another, until they were able to find land in what's now Paradise Valley. And they were one of the first churches to anchor a whole row of churches on that road, on Lincoln Drive. And when they first started, they looked around for people whose values matched theirs. And Frank Lloyd Wright came from a lineage of Unitarian Universalists. And so they worked with him, but unfortunately, he passed away before the building was designed. But the community was able to work with one of his proteges, Blaine Drake. And Blaine Drake designed this building that was amazing and not only reflected the time and the fashion of architect, but also Unitarian Universalism and that feeling of roundness and togetherness and that circle that you can feel us drawing wider and wider is reflected all in the architecture of this building they built. And when I say they built, I mean they built. On Sundays, they would host service out in the desert and then work to do the construction. The elders, the youngest, and everyone in between would use their hands to build the walls. And that structure still stands today. And that group of people would no longer fit in a meeting room at the YMCA because they have grown and grown and grown and number in the hundreds and have affected thousands and thousands of people. And their members have been leaders in Red for Ed. Their members have been leaders in the immigration justice movements. Their members have been leaders in environmental change and climate change movements. And they have done so much work to truly shape justice and love in the state of Arizona. They have a legacy that is resilient and tough and wild and strong. And they are also that wacky group of people who met in a random room just trying to be pushy about their agenda. Thanks for listening to Two Stories.
Thank you, Katie. Each week, we split our offering between this congregation and an organization that shares our values. For April, our Share the Plate partner is the Singletons. The Singletons is a homegrown, Arizona-based nonprofit devoted to meeting the needs of single-parent families who are battling cancer. They help provide strength, hope, resources, and community. For all that you give, we are so grateful. Ushers, thank you for your willing hands in helping us pass the plate.
we recognize that our lives are interconnected. Part of our journey as a community is sharing our significant milestones, joys, and sorrows. You can put a note in the chat on Zoom. If you want us to read your joy or sorrow next week, you can fill out a card in the small table at the back of the sanctuary. There is a joy here. Jana is happy that she sold her first painting. Okay. I'm checking to see if there's anything on the chat right now. And some sorrows. Linda Vance writes that I am devastated after just learning that a dear and close friend died unexpectedly last night following a fall. And Karen writes, please send positive energy to Chase B as he is catatonic after his third suicide attempt. May our joys and sorrows, those named and those held in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts, help us draw closer and care for each other.
My friends, I invite you now to join me in a time of meditation and prayer, to connect to that which can give us solace and give us strength. If you are willing, please settle into a position that you find helps to ground you, perhaps your feet on the floor. And if you are comfortable doing so, you can close your eyes or look softly into the middle distance. And breathe. Just for a moment, feel your breath in and out. You are here. You have arrived. There is no need to rush. You may sit and breathe. Feel the strong earth beneath you, supporting your body. Feel the presence of the people closest to you, around you, all of you breathing. Feel the presence of all of us here in this room, part of your community. All of us here on this land, on this solid earth. And now let your mind cast over the past. Imagine all who have passed through this room, our spiritual ancestors, both those who are living and those who are no longer physically with us. Cast your mind further back to the workers who built this sanctuary. And even further to the people over thousands upon thousands of years who have been present on this land, on this patch of earth. Think of all that this land has witnessed. All of this history is part of us. Now draw your attention back to this time, but feel the power of the earth that supports you, its history, the power of the earth, the patience of the earth, the stability of the earth. As you bring your mind back here to the present, take those things with you. Feel the earth beneath you, and feel once again the presence of the people about you in this room. And bring your awareness back to your breath. In and out. Spirit of life, Spirit of love, God of many names. In times of struggle, may we feel our community surrounding us. May we feel the power of history behind us. May we feel the strength of the earth beneath us. May we know that your love supports us in ways that we do not always see. And may we support one another in turn. Amen, and blessed be.
As you can tell from Katie's story and Reverend Howe's meditation, today's service is about history and the importance of telling stories and how they can be told well or incorrectly. And so I wanted to do a song dedicated by the arranger to the ongoing Palestinian struggle for freedom and dignity, as they are people who are maybe not being remembered correctly often. La Rachal Soti is by the Syrian composer Sami Shuker. The lyrics are in Arabic. They mean, if my voice departs, your voices will not. I look to tomorrow and my heart is with you. If the singer dies, the songs remain, bringing together broken and suffering hearts. And this arrangement is by Shireen Abu Qader, who is Palestinian, grew up in Jordan, and now lives in Toronto. So may we continue to hear Palestinian voices and songs.
Now
words of Unitarian minister Theodore Parker in 1852. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but a little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience, and from what I see, I am sure that it bends toward justice. Things refuse to be mismanaged long.
The words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1958. Evil may so shape events that Caesar will occupy a palace and Christ a cross. But that same Christ arose and split history into AD and BC so that even the life of Caesar must be dated by his name. Yes, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. There is something in the universe which justifies saying, truth, crushed to earth, will rise again.
The words of storyteller and author Melvin Bray in 2017. The challenge is that people of goodwill often act as if the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice on its own. It does not. God made humanity the catalyst toward this moral end. Unless people of goodwill act in good faith toward a just end, justice will not be found. Justice, like all other virtues, is a relational challenge, seeking a relational response.
We're going to do another one because Reverend Howe quotes directly from the musical Hamilton in his sermon. Composer Lin-Manuel Miranda has said that his 2015 biographical musical Hamilton is sort of about America then as told by America now. So in our next song, our protagonist, Alexander Hamilton, has just been granted a command in the Revolutionary War, and General George Washington warns him to be careful and to not die a martyr. And today, Asher Thomas will sing the part of George Washington, and Rachel Godin will sing the part of Hamilton.
I was younger than you are now when I was given my first command. I led my men straight into a massacre. I witnessed their deaths firsthand. I made every mistake. I felt the shame rise in me. And even now I lie awake, knowing history has its eyes. History has its eyes on me. History has its eyes on you.
Thank you. Who lives? Who dies? Who tells your story? The words which you just heard the choir sing are from the hit musical Hamilton, which opened almost exactly 10 years ago. With a hip-hop score and a Broadway cast that was primarily people of color, it tells a fresh version of the story of the founding of the United States, focusing primarily on Alexander Hamilton and his allies and enemies and loves. But throughout the musical, there is a recurring theme. What stories get included in our histories? How do we know about them? And who tells them? Early in the first act, Hamilton and his revolutionary friends sing that they hope their children will one day tell the story of tonight. Later, in the same act, we hear the song we just heard, and George Washington says, "Let me tell you what I'd wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?" And at the close of the musical, Washington's words, "Who lives, who dies, who tells your story," become the title and the refrain of the closing number, in which Hamilton's widow, Eliza, tells how she spent the rest of her life establishing his legacy. I've been thinking a lot recently about history and about which stories get told. I work part-time for the Unitarian Universalist Association, mostly helping to maintain and grow the Worship Web, which is an online collection of readings and prayers and ritual and poetry. And I'm also the administrator for the upcoming virtual hymnal. But my supervisor, the Reverend Erica Hewitt, sometimes finds other projects for me to work on. And early last year, she asked if I could help out with a project to find more information about the lives of certain 19th century Black Unitarians and Universalists. And doing this research made me think about the questions raised by the musical Hamilton. Who tells your story? Why are some stories told and others not? And how do those stories affect our understanding of history? Today, at this crisis point in the history of the United States, these questions feel especially relevant. Relevant, but not new. The 14th century English poet Geoffrey Chaucer had an explanation for why some people's stories are remembered and others are not. He imagined a goddess of fame who carves people's names on the side of a giant mountain made of ice. If your name is carved on the sunny side of the mountain, the ice melts away and your name is slowly forgotten. If your name is carved in the ice on the shady side of the mountain, your memory lives on. The goddess decides. But outside of Chaucer's dream, it's not just the goddess that decides. There are other forces at work. Some people and some stories are ignored because of the biases of the storytellers or of society. And some stories never get to happen at all. One of the 19th century Black Unitarians I researched for my job was the Reverend John Bird Wilkins. I had not heard of him before, and the initial information I was given about him was this. John Bird Wilkins was a Black man who had been a Baptist minister. In 1887, he founded a liberal church in Chicago, and he affiliated with the Unitarians. But he left Chicago in 1888, gave up preaching, and made his living afterwards as an inventor. That's the first version of the story, and as Katie demonstrated for us in the Together time, much depends on how you tell the story. And it turns out that there is much more to the story of John Bird Wilkins than that summary suggests. I learned some more about him by searching through newspapers from the 1880s, and I got further information from his entry in the online Dictionary of Unitarian and Universalist Biography. and also from a family history that was published by his great-granddaughter, Carolyn Marie Wilkins. And I will tell you what I learned. But since I began this sermon with the question, who tells your story, I want to emphasize that you'll be hearing Reverend Bird Wilkins' story as told by a 60-year-old white man interpreting the sources that I just mentioned. I will try my best, but there are going to be perspectives that are missing from this telling of the story. And I also want to warn you that the story includes violence and threats of violence. So, let me tell you about John Bird Wilkins. In the mid-1880s, he was a Baptist preacher in St. Paul, Minnesota. But in 1887, he was called to be the new pastor of Bethesda Baptist Church in Chicago. So he moved there with his wife and 2 children. Pretty quickly, he was involved in controversy because Reverend Bird Wilkins started serving open communion at his congregation. That is, he would share communion with non-Baptists. This may not sound like much to you and me as modern-day Unitarian Universalists, but it was a big deal for the conservative Baptists at the time. And in July 1887, Reverend Bird Wilkins received an anonymous letter, which said, "If the Baptists don't put a stop to your having open communion, we will put a stop to it. You can't live in Chicago. If we can't get you one way, we will get you another." And Reverend Bird Wilkins had other views as well that angered some people. On August 21st, 1887, he preached a sermon that resulted in a front-page story on the Chicago Tribune. Reverend Bird Wilkins' text that Sunday was the episode from the book of Matthew, in which Jesus tells a rich young man to give away all his possessions and all of his money because it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Using this passage and others, Reverend Bird Wilkins argued on that Sunday that Jesus, the Apostle Peter, and the 4 evangelists were socialists. "The world will call it socialism," he preached, "but I will call it Christianity." It seems to me that he has a good point there, and yet some in his congregation and many of his fellow Baptist ministers did not appreciate this sermon. But when the conservative Baptists forced Bird Wilkins to leave his congregation, he found support among the local Unitarians. They helped him as he founded a new congregation which he called the People's Temple. A newspaper in Wisconsin wrote that this congregation would be, quote, "the first African Unitarian church in the history of the world." This was in September and October of 1887. But in January 1888, Reverend Bird Wilkins was once again on the front page of the Chicago Tribune because on New Year's Day, while he was preaching at the People's Temple, unknown attackers set fire to his house. Another anonymous letter came saying, "We believe you are teaching a religion of the devil. We will kill you before you shall hurt us with your new religion. Our white Orthodox churches tell us to run you out of this town, and you have got to go. This is our last warning." This attack on his home and his family was too much to bear, and Reverend Bird Wilkins did leave Chicago sometime in 1888. The People's Temple did not survive his departure. Records of Bird Wilkins are scanty after that, but he seems never to have led a congregation again. So why is Reverend Bird Wilkins' story not more widely known? One reason, of course, is that we like winners, and that even though he founded, as the newspaper said, the first African Unitarian church in the history of the world, it closed its doors less than a year after its founding. But the reason it closed was because it was such a radical idea. Its founder had been chased out of town with credible threats of death. The reason why Reverend Bird Wilkins is not well known today is not because of the whims of the goddess of fame, but rather because the people of Chicago would not let him do the work that could have led to a new strain of Unitarian culture in the Midwest. And the local Unitarians were unable or unwilling to help him through this additional crisis. Who lives? Who dies? Who tells your story? The people telling the stories in Chicago in 1888 did not think that any of this was significant enough to keep in memory. A brief controversy in the newspaper, an article about arson, and then silence, and the warmth of sunlight melting John Bird Wilkins's name in the ice. Interestingly enough, there is a somewhat analogous story that happened more recently. The Reverend Carlton Pearson was a black Pentecostal minister in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with a large following and with impeccable evangelical credentials. But in the 1990s, he had an epiphany. He finally could no longer believe that a loving God would condemn anyone to an eternity in hell. In that moment, he realized that he was a universalist. Heaven is universal. Heaven is for everyone. Pentecostals view universalism as heresy and the work of the devil. Reverend Pearson was denounced by the leaders of his denomination. His colleagues abandoned him. Most of his parishioners left, and he had to sell the church where he had previously preached to 6,000 people every Sunday. But he made a connection with the minister of All Souls Unitarian Church in Tulsa, and eventually about 200 members of his former congregation started attending All Souls. Reverend Pearson became an affiliate minister there, and he continued to preach at All Souls until his death in 2023. Let me be clear. The merger of congregations, of church-going cultures that happened here was not easy, and it was not problem-free. But compare the stories. Here is another black minister from a conservative tradition whose theology became so liberal that he ended up in common cause with Unitarian Universalists. Reverend Bird Wilkins was mostly forgotten. What about Reverend Pearson? In 2005, the radio show and podcast This American Life had an episode devoted to his story. UU World did a feature on him and how All Souls Tulsa was changed by this influx of former Pentecostals. And in 2018, Netflix released a movie about his story called Come Sunday. It's still available there, and it's a good watch. So why did Reverend Pearson's story turn out differently than Reverend Bird Wilkins's? Why does it get told? I think it's because Reverend Pearson had the chance to preach his new beliefs. He had a pulpit at All Souls and eventually at other congregations as well. And to complete the symmetry of the comparison, one of the congregations he ended up leading was a New Thought church in Chicago, the very city that had chased out Reverend Bird Wilkins. And what changed between these two stories was that the arc of the moral universe had bent just a bit closer to justice. And that little bend helped Reverend Pearson succeed where Reverend Bird Wilkins had not been allowed to. That little bend in the arc had taken a century of struggle and hard work, but it had an effect. And yet, campaigns of arson and anonymous personal threats against religious professionals are still with us today. I am thinking, for example, of the congregations whose Black Lives Matter banners and pride flags are regularly defaced, torn down, and, yes, burned. And I think of Cristina Rivera, a Latina woman on the UUA Board of Trustees in 2017 who received anonymous threatening letters from someone who was almost certainly a Unitarian Universalist. We may be closer to justice than we were in the 1880s, but there is still a long way to go. Who lives? Who dies? Who tells your story? Ironically enough, these words apply to the musical Hamilton itself. Soon after it became a sensation, Hamilton was criticized for not squarely facing the issue of slavery and for ignoring the role of Native Americans in the early history of the United States. Lin-Manuel Miranda, the show's creator, agreed with those criticisms. And Leslie Odom Jr., who played Aaron Burr in the Broadway run of the show, spoke about those criticisms. He said, "Lin wrote the story that was on his heart to write. I signed on to be a part of the show that I believed in. That was our leg of the race. Now it's your turn. There's no doubt in my mind that some young kid is going to look at Hamilton and write the show that makes what we did look quaint." And that, I think, is our job, to be that young kid, to see the failings of what has been done and said and told before, to understand that every storyteller and every society brings biases to their tales, and to see if we can highlight the voices of people who have been silenced in the past. We can tell the stories of John Bird Wilkins and others like him, and we can include not just what happened, but also what wasn't allowed to happen. If we retell these stories, and if we hand the microphone to people who know more about them, we will better understand our past and our present. This is relational work, and as our reading today from Melvin Bray tells us, this is how we bend the arc of the moral universe. We are living in historic times, and the stories that we tell are the first draft of history. May we tell these stories well, so that our descendants will know not only what happened in these times, but also what could have been, and what may yet still come to be when we bend the arc of history closer to justice. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.
Amen, sir. Let's close with a hopeful African-American spiritual that sings of heading towards better times, heading towards the promised land. Please rise in body or spirit, sing along with us. Where I'm bound, come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Where I'm bound, there'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom. and there will be justice. And there will be singing in that land. Please remain standing.
After our service ends, our coffee hour will be in the John's room across the patio right there, and noon activities will be listed on the screen. Reverend Everett, please close our service.
When we are surrounded by lies, our stories tell us the deepest truths. When we are despairing, our stories give us hope. When we are struggling, our stories remind us that challenges precede every victory. May truth, hope, and strength carry us together through the coming years as we bend the arc of history toward the justice that we dream of. May it be so. Go in peace. Go in love.